Hey everybody, welcome to today's video where we're going to try and explain how to create stitching in 3ds Max. So before we start, we have to go over and do our homework and get some reference images. Now I went ahead and I downloaded a few images just so we can showcase better how that stitching looks like. So what we're going to try to replicate is something like this, or you have different kinds of stitching. As you can see over here, you have stitches going from both ways, and in the middle, that's where the two pieces of leather meet up and make this crevice in the middle. Then you have stitchings that go across that crevice, so different types of stitching. Then you have something like this, again like the previous type. Then you have stitchings like these, which come a bit at an angle from each other. And these are most of the time they can be seen on steering wheels or interior of cars or whatnot. So you get the idea. You have a lot of different types of stitching. So even you have something like this. And here's another one. This is a fairly simple, a straightforward stitch without side seams, so just a regular stitch, or even something like this. So what we're going to try to replicate is, well, the first type is something like this. As you can see, a fairly simple chair, nothing too complex, and in all honesty, it should be fairly simple because you only have two pieces of stitching going across, and in the middle you have this indentation, or piece that is going outwards. So let's go and try to tackle this. So I'm gonna open Max. I actually went ahead and made a simple cylinder, so nothing too fancy, with a bit of a edit poly. I just cleaned up the top so we end up with nice quads. As you can see, I only just deleted one across from all of them. So just select one edge, skip the other one, select one, delete, and that way you end up with quads. I've done the same thing on the bottom as well. Now, just for this tutorial, let's go ahead and try to use this to obtain this result. So we want to get something like this. So the first thing we have to do here is define where those stitchings are going to be. And from what I can see here, those stitchings are going around at the edge. So let's try and incorporate that into our model. So in order to do this, the first thing I'm going to do is I need more geometry here. Instead of going and doing it by hand, I'm simply going to slap on a turbo smooth. That is going to help me with getting a bit more geometry into my model. So now, once I have this, I want to continue building upon it. So another edit poly so we can continue working. So this is the edge. I can see that these two lines, so these two would be perfect for that indentation for the actual seams. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to loop them, and now I'm going to go and do a small extrude. So make sure you have something like the width of the extrude for something very small, and a small value for the height as well. So let's go, try not to make it too deep. All right, so once we have this, we don't want to have it so sharp at the bottom like this, because once we turbo smooth it one more time, it's going to be very wobbly. So what we want to do is chamfer this one more time with a small amount, not this big. All right, 0.1, put in 2 segments, and this should help us retain this form. All right, so if we put on a turbo smooth, now we should be getting something like this. So this might be the case in which we want to have it. So if we have this middle part sticking out like this is okay. If not, we can go ahead and add a bit more details by going here and rounding out these edges. But for now, let's accept this as it is and continue to actually doing the seams. So on top of this turbo smooth, I'm going to put on another edit poly. Now the reason for adding this edit poly is that so I can extract a path for where my stitching is supposed to move. So I'm going to go over here, select the line that's in the middle. It doesn't really have to be any particular line, just one in the middle. Hold on Control, select one more here. So I have 2 lines, but let's go ahead and do it like this. First, I'm going to select this and then hit loop. That's going to loop it all around and create shape. Let's call this stitching 01. Make sure I don't think it's going to matter if it's smooth or linear. I'm going to leave it at linear. I don't think it's going to be a problem. And I'm going to do the same thing with another line over here. So again, loop, create shape, stitching 02. Okay. All right, so we have 2 lines now. We have the stitching 01 and the stitching 02. The great thing about using splines in Max is that you can use those splines to generate geometry. The easiest way would be to go over to rendering, enable in render and enable in viewport. That way we're gonna see it. In this case, it's way too thick. We don't need it to be that thick, so let's make it like 0.1. I think should be about enough, but we'll see. 0.1, maybe 0.05. Let's go with 0.1 and we'll see if this works. Now the important thing here is once you're doing this and you make the geometry from the line or the spline, make sure you tick this field over here where it says generate mapping coordinates. The reason for this is that we want to add a certain texture to this seam, and without this field ticked on, Max will not know how to apply the textures. So again, let's go over here on the other one and apply the same option. So with 0.1, and we end up with something like this. All right, so I'm gonna go with my camera. And now let's see how we can make the seam that we made actually look like seams. What we want to do here is I'm going to unhide all so I can have my scene here. And what I want to do is I want to make a material. And I want that material to be used to show up on my stitching. So the first way that the first type of stitching that we're going to show is basically going to be, well, we're going to try and cheat. The way to do it is we're going to try to make this line appear as it is a stitching, but it's only going to be a fake kind of stitching, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to take one material, call it stitching, and apply it to my stitches. So now let's go ahead and first of all I want to have one base for rendering. So let's go ahead and hit the render and see what we have at the moment. From what we can see, we are starting to get some shape, but since everything is kind of white, we are not really seeing too much of detail. So I guess this would be the right time to try and get our seams, because if we can get them to be a certain color, that's going to have an effect or have high contrast. It's going to be better visible. So let's go ahead. For now, I'm going to choose black color for this. Click OK. All right, I just want to see how this is going to look like. So again, I'm going to put one more render. And now we can see that black line here. So this is okay, but now the problem that I have here is that this does look like a single line, but it's a far-fetched from being stitch. Stitches, as we know, are actually have a bit of well, space between them. We can see it again. Let's see it over here. We can see that even though it's a line, it has a bit of a gap between those two lines. So let's see how we can make this appear on our seam. Again, I'm going to open up my material. I'm going to take my stitching material. I'm going to scroll down to where it says opacity. Now, once here, I'm going to click on none. And from here, I'm going to choose a gradient ramp. So here. What gradient ramp is doing, it's giving you this ramp going from black to white. And the way that opacity works is pretty much everything that is white, it's visible, while everything that is black, it's invisible. So we want to do, what we want to do here is we want to make sure that we have a continuous line that is going to be visible, then come to a certain point where it's invisible, and then restart again. To do it, what we have to do is, first of all, over here I have black. So this means this side is totally invisible where it starts. And then as it progresses, it gets more and more visible. So what I want to do is I'm going to double click over here, and I'm going to change this to black as well. So what we have now is totally invisible from both sides, and it's half visible in the middle. So I'm going to change this again, double click, and make it 100% visible in the middle. So click again, OK. And here's one more thing that I'm going to do that is going to help me define better. So I'm going to click here once. It's going to put in one more handle, double click, make this 100% visible, double click over here, make this 100% visible. And I'm gonna go over here again in the middle between these, put in one more spot, make it half or just more towards black, right click, copy, put it in the middle, right click, paste. So what I've done here is the middle part is going to be 100% visible. Then as it progresses towards the edge, it's going to be invisible. So let's see how this is going to work on our seam. So if I'm going to render, and we're going to notice that nothing has changed. The reason for this is that this map is way too big, and when applied to our model, it's really not seen. So what we have to do is we have to increase the tiling. So for now, I'm going to try, and first of all, I'm going to go closer so I can see it. Let's go and isolate it. Now, I'm going to try and increase this tiling to, let's say, something like 200. And now I can see that nothing has changed yet. But the problem for this is that as it is, it's going from the top to bottom. So I probably want to rotate it for 90 degrees. There we go. Let's see now. Okay, we do want to have it at 20. Just let's try the tiling 200 over here. And there we go. Now we can see that we have this white and black showing up. So again, let's isolate. And let's try and re-render now and see what happens. So render. As you can see now, we changed the opacity map with this gradient ramp. And since we have this kind of a shape in our video, or actually in our material, we can see that it looks like this over here, which is actually what we want it to look like. And the thing is, in majority of your renders, this is gonna be more than enough. It is going to look good on anything that's at least a bit away from the actual model that you're rendering. But the problem here is what would happen if we have a render that would be something more in line like this, where the camera is really close to the stitchings. Well, in that case, we're gonna have a problem. Let me show you why. I'm gonna get into my close camera, this one, and I'm going to render one more time so you can see what I'm talking about. You can notice right away that the stitching, even though it looked fine from afar, when you get close to it, you're gonna notice some problems. So in order to get stitching that is going to look nice up close, we have to resort to a different approach. So let's try and see how we would do something like this. So for now, I'm going to select my stitchings. I'm going to turn off enable in render, enable in viewport, as I don't want to use the geometry anymore. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and actually make actual geometry for our stitching. The way to do it is, and this type of stitching gives us more, or actually this type of modeling gives us more control over how we want our stitching to look like. For example, if we want to have something like this, the previous approach to doing stitching would be invalid, because we cannot make our line to basically look like this. So if we want to have something like this, what we would have to do is we're going to have to make this kind of shape. And this is fairly easy to do. All you have to do is simply go over in Max, take in, let's go something like, so I'm gonna hold down Control, right click, that way I'm gonna have a quick access to my creation. So I'm gonna go and click line, and in the line, just make something like this. Okay, move it. And both of those, I'm going to fill it. So we have something rounded like this. All right, so for these, I'm going to turn on the enable in render and enable in viewport. It's going to give me some width. So, all right, let's go ahead and see what we get. Okay, the size is a bit too big, but once we get it to the edge, we'll actually see how big this thing is. All right, I can see that it's rather too big, so we're gonna have to scale it down a bit. So again, select those, move them inwards, make it a bit thinner. So it's way too thick, 0.03. Yeah, now we can even make it smaller. Oops. 3. Make it smaller, so we get something like a stitch. All right, this should work, I think. Let me see if I delete both of these. Yeah, these are gonna work. All right, so now what we want to do here is I want to add an edit poly on top of this. I'm going to delete the bottom portion and the top portion, and make sure you just encompass these two guys. They usually are created when you add edit poly on top of a line or a spline. And now the important part here is before we do anything else, we need to address the issue of your pivot. Now, depending on where your pivot is that's how it's going to take your line or your spline and, well, basically distribute it along the line where we want it to be distributed at. So what we want to do here is go over and center it to the object, and then move this over till about the edge, so about here. And all right, so once we did this, we have the base for our stitch. So what we want to do here is we want to take these lines and use them as the actual guidelines for where this stitch is going to move to. So the way to do this is, again, quite simple. All you have to do is go over the motion tab, and while you're here, what you want to do is click on this plus button over here where it says assign controller. Once you're here, you have a few options. You can choose to limit the position of your line, which is what we want to do. And once you click on the position, you have this little button over here where it says assign controller. Click on it, and from here choose path constraint and click OK. So with this, we have this option where it says add path. I'm going to click on add path and click on this spline over here. Once you do this, you're going to notice that our spline, or our mesh, got stuck on the line over here. All right. So what we want to do here is make sure we have follow on. And as you can see, now it's stuck on our line, but it's kind of the wrong way. So what we want to do is rotate it. But now the thing is, since this has been put on the line, if we try to move it, you're going to see it's moving only along those lines. So if we want to do anything to it, we have to select the element and then rotate it. All right. Let's go ahead and put it back to shaded. Now move it outwards so we can actually see it. Rotate it one more time. And more or less just try to position it however we want it. Now, once we have it like this, now the way to multiply it along this line would be to go over in tools and use our snapshot option. Snapshot is going to allow us to have it copied along its route. So for example, if I drop in 100 and click, make sure that instances, click OK, you're going to notice that this continues across that entire line. But in this case, I think 100 is going to be too low, so Control Z, tools, let's try 300. Instance, okay. All right, so with this, we're starting to get closer to what we would want to have, but I think even 300 is going to be too low. All right, let's try 350. All right, and since all of the other ones are actual instances, I can select just one and rotate it until I get it to a position. For example, if I want them to be straight up like this, I can leave it. And now if I go over to the closed camera, you can see that all of those stitches are actually geometry. So let's try and do that same thing with our normal camera and isolate and re-render and see what happens. And as you can see, even when you're watching it from afar, you can still see those stitchings. And this is from the far camera. And when you get to the close and you render. All right, let's go ahead, render. You will notice that you can actually see the stitchings here. Now, granted, this should have been more in, but we can just select any of these alcoves and get them inside. So again, this is the more detailed approach. And for example, if you can see here, I have one more shape that I've placed over here. It's basically the same shape as we had on the bottom one, but this one is simply put across from each other. So we have a type of an X happening over here, and let's go ahead and apply that X to this line. So again, over back to motion, position, make sure we have a path constraint, add a path, put it on this. And from what I can see here, it's actually looking okay, but just move it upwards a bit so you can see it better. There we go. Again, snapshot, 350 instances, okay. And there we have it. We have a different kind of stitching for this upper part. And again, re-render and see the difference. Alright, so there we are. Alright, so I'm gonna go ahead and apply a UV unwrap on this, put a actual leather texture, and I'll be back so you guys can see how this thing looks when it's unwrapped and rendered. Alright, so here we are back. I've done a quick unwrap of this chair. I've added leather material to it. So let's see how our model looks like when it's rendered. And as you can see, even with our second type of modeling that we tried with the actual geometry for the stitching, we can see that even when we're using this type of or this approach to making stitching, it looks simply amazing when you're looking at it from afar. It's gonna look even more detailed when it's up close. So again, let's try one more time with the closer camera so you guys can see that we no longer have that issue that we had previously. As you can see here, you can right away you can even see how the stitching looks like. Let's just get it upwards a bit. Right, and let's position it to a better angle. Alright, so this is quite close. Again, let's re-render and see the final outcome. And as we can see, now we no longer have that issue. Plus the second type that we made, the X type of stitching, is now considerably more visible and better looking. But since this is a very close-up render, then we start having different kinds of problems where the texture is not high resolution enough. We need better textures for the stitching, but that's a theme for a whole nother video. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, as it really does help a lot with YouTube. So that would be it for the video. I hope you guys had fun, you managed to learn something new. So take care now, and I'll see you all in the next video.